Hi everyone, welcome to today's chat, which is all about appetite, which I think is apt as we head into Christmas. So, first of all, if eating was just a simple process, it would make life easy. If you just got hungry, you ate, you stopped. But appetite plays a massive role, and I see it time and time again, where it's hard to eat when you don't have an appetite, or you have such a huge appetite you actually can't stop eating. So I think this is a really important topic to pull apart and have a discussion about. So there is a difference between hunger and appetite. Hunger is a biological need to eat, whereas appetite is the desire to eat. Now, you can have an appetite and not be hungry. And our appetite will dictate the kind of food we eat, how much we eat. When we're hungry, we pretty much will eat anything. When we are just talking about an appetite, we're not hungry, but we have an appetite, we're much more likely to be a little bit more fussy about what we eat. It won't be the apple, it'll be the chocolate cake. And there's lots of factors that affect appetite that can either increase or decrease that desire to eat. So carbohydrates, fats, and proteins in particular all affect appetite. And a diet rich in protein has been shown to manage our appetite in a really healthy way. It keeps us full for longer, and it helps to stabilize our blood sugar. So our meals really should have protein as the base. So whether that's just like a palm or two of whatever protein, whether it's plant protein or animal protein, that should be a big part of our meal, and then vegetables should be packed on top of that. And then the carbohydrates come in after that, dependent, of course, on how active you are. So a diet rich in carbohydrates can create a roller coaster of feeling full, then feeling hungry, and then that increases our appetite. So we have to be really careful. The anticipation, the sight, the smell, even the taste of those really yummy, high, refined carbohydrate foods. So I'm talking biscuits, cakes, chippies, bread, pasta, the kind of foods I mean. I'm not talking about vegetables and fruit. They are the things that stimulate our appetite. And after we eat carbohydrates, we have an increase in glucose, we have an increase in insulin, which then gets the glucose into our cells and out of our bloodstream, which then causes us to have a crash, and then we become hungry again. And it can become a vicious cycle for some people. So that's why ideally having the protein and your vegetables as a carbohydrate can be better than having a carbohydrate-rich meal. Which can actually then increase your appetite and can be linked to weight gain. There was a study in 2017 that showed that people that followed a ketogenic diet had an increase in appetite at the start of the diet, and then it stabilized. So protein and fat can help to manage appetite, but as I said, keto in this study actually increased it at the beginning. But carbohydrate creates the up and down and the issues around appetite too. Mood can play a big role in our appetite. Emotional eating basically goes hand in hand. So when we are stressed, when we're upset, when we're depressed, when we're anxious, then our appetite can either increase or decrease. It's really personal to us. So when my son was hospitalized when he was 18 months old, my appetite completely disappeared, which is generally my pattern. And you might know what your pattern is. I know that when I'm really stressed, my appetite goes, and I find it really hard to eat. So at that time when my son was hospitalized, appetite went. I had to force myself to eat as a routine, because I would have quite easily gone without eating for a month. And I lost a huge amount of weight because I really wasn't wanting to eat. And we know that certain mental health conditions, especially depression, can also affect appetite. And again, it affects people differently. It either increases it or decreases the appetite and the amount that you then eat. There are certain medications that we know can affect appetite and can also affect weight. So that's blood pressure medications, diabetes medications, chemotherapy medications, some antibiotics, some steroids, and there are also some antidepressants that can affect appetite. So it's always worth checking in with your doctor, either at a time of when you're prescribed it, or if you're on any of those medications, and ask your doctor if there are side effects related to appetite and weight, just so that you know, because it might not be anything you're doing, it might be the medication that you're on. It's also really common to lose your appetite when you're unwell for a short time. And there are some conditions where losing appetite can be a symptom. So thyroid conditions, hypo and hyperthyroid, they influence appetite, either increased or decreased. They also affect how we burn that food and turn it either into energy or fat. So again, it's always worth talking to your GP and getting your thyroid checked. Other conditions like cancer, Parkinson's, and kidney disease can all result in a lack of appetite and then subsequent weight loss. So it's really important that if you lose your appetite for more than a week or so, you're starting to lose weight unintentionally, that you see your GP and get that checked out and find out what is the possible cause for that. As we get older, our appetite might decrease due to hormones, social circumstances, bereavement will affect our, which sadly part of getting older, will affect our appetite. We also have declining energy needs, so therefore we don't have the appetite we used to because we don't need the energy, because we might not be as active as we were when we were younger. Changes in our taste and our smell is really common, and that can affect our appetite. If, you know, digestion starts with our senses, so if your senses are impaired, then that can affect your appetite, digestion, and hunger, and all sorts of things. So also problems with your teeth. That's again another reason why appetite might decrease. So it's age is something to look forward to. And then we come to my two favorite topics: the gut health and hormones and our cycle. So hormones are not just estrogen, progesterone. There are lots of hormones in our body. There's a whole system called the endocrine system. And hormones are basically messengers in our body. And there are hormones that are specific to appetite. So in particular, leptin and ghrelin. So leptin is made by our fat cells, and it's responsible for decreasing our appetite. It makes us feel full. And ghrelin is responsible for making us hungry and increasing our appetite. And I remember when I used to work at a college, and the college was in a place called Grey Lynn. And there were loads of cafes around, and I went to a cafe pretty much every day. I worked in this college, naturopathic college, and lived on coffee and cake, not very naturopathic. And I remembered learning about leptin and ghrelin, because I remember ghrelin as in a place where all the cafes are, that's responsible for making us hungry, because I just saw all these cafes and would want to go to the cafes. Put on so much weight. So ghrelin is produced in our stomach, and it sends a message to the brain that you basically need to eat. And then once you eat, ghrelin levels drop quite a lot, particularly after up to 3 hours after eating. And there's been scientists that have found that slimmer people generally have lower amounts of leptin, our making us feel full hormone, and obese people generally have more. Sometimes they might build up a resistance to the appetite suppressing effects of leptin too. So these two hormones are really important for our appetite and hunger. Now, our reproductive hormones also make a difference. So estrogen inhibits our food intake, whereas progesterone and testosterone stimulate our appetite. And that's, again, why we sometimes have a lower appetite around ovulation, because that's when estrogen is really high. And also what can happen is our appetite will increase more in the second half of our cycle, because estrogen starts to decline, progesterone is at its highest, where our metabolism increases in that second half of our cycle, and we crave more. You know, we have a need for nutrients, and so our appetite increases naturally in the second half of our cycle. Cortisol also increases in the second half of our cycle, and we need more nutrients to manage that. There's been some really interesting studies that suggest that hormones that are known as androgens, so testosterone is an androgen. It's like a male type hormone, for want of a better word, and there's a few of them, not just testosterone, but they may be involved in that abdominal obesity, which is common in midlife women. And others have shown that estrogen, particularly estrogen, when it was given as HRT, actually reduced belly fat. So we know that when estrogen drops, insulin, another hormone, basically has a relationship with estrogen. So estrogen drops, particularly when you get to midlife. Insulin increases, and as it increases, we become more at risk of insulin resistance, and that it becomes more common. That affects appetite and affects weight gain as well. So there's lots of hormones thyroid hormone, which I've talked about, that are all playing a role in our appetite, hunger, and weight. It's not just one thing. And then we come to bacteria. So sometimes we actually don't have any control over our appetite or even weight, because there's a number of studies that now show that specific bacteria actually influence our appetite and influence what we crave. So they know that some specific bacteria produce proteins that influence our intake, how much we eat. They change our taste buds, they increase our appetite for certain foods, and they can cause cravings. And different bacteria prefer different foods depending on what gives them the energy to survive and thrive. So Bacteroidetes prefer fats, where our bifidobacteria, which are our kind of good bacteria, they prefer foods rich in fiber. Carbohydrates, the good carbohydrates, we're talking vegetables, fruit, not your chocolate cake kind, they're the best source for our beneficial Akkermansia muciniphila, which is a really good bacteria to have a good amount of. It keeps our gut healthy, and it loves fruit and veg, berries and fiber-rich vegetables. So they're the kind of foods that they crave for, because that's what keeps them going. So if you have more bacteria that's perhaps not the healthiest type of bacteria and you don't want lots of it, then you're more likely to crave sugary type foods like your cakes and your biscuits, because that's what drives them. It's what gets them to grow and thrive. And that's not necessarily what we want to be doing. We want to be feeding our good bacteria, and that's usually fruit and veg. So we need to improve our diet in order to improve your appetite and cravings for healthier foods, because we want our good bacteria to be calling the shots on our appetite and cravings, not our bad bacteria. Now, some of you might find that you don't have an appetite in the morning, and there can be lots of reasons for not having an appetite after you wake up. It might be that you ate your dinner late, so you're full, or you ate a really large dinner, and therefore you still feel full, especially when that meal was protein or fat rich. So it's always better, if that's a possibility, that you actually have smaller dinners. It's better to have a bigger lunch, a decent breakfast, a bigger lunch, and a much smaller dinner, and to not eat for at least 3 hours before you go to bed, in order to allow your body to digest. Our body does most of its work at night, clearing out the gut, and something called the MMC, which I know I've talked about before, is really active at night. So if you eat late at night, you actually affect how your gut functions and repairs and rejuvenates itself during the night. So try as much as you can to only eat like at least 3 hours before you go to bed, and don't eat or snack any later than that, and try and have a smaller meal, and see if that helps your appetite in the morning. Your sleep definitely affects your appetite. Ghrelin tends to be low first in the morning. Remember, ghrelin is our appetite hormone. And adrenaline as well, cortisol, are higher in the morning, and adrenaline can suppress appetite because it's a stress hormone, and it will encourage our body to break down any stored glucose to fuel us, and that's going to be in our muscles or in our liver. So we know that poor sleep is associated with an increase in ghrelin levels and appetite and hunger. So getting a good night's sleep will actually really affect your appetite, and it might be that if you have a good night's sleep, you will have a healthy appetite in the morning, and it will be an appropriate appetite. Things like pregnancy, mental health conditions, being unwell or run down also will affect appetite in the morning. So it's worth getting that checked. Or, if you're pregnant, then pregnancy completely stuffs up your appetite as well, and cravings take. So some just general tips, really simple tips. Number one, have protein and vegetables as the foundation of your meal, and then add any carbs alongside. The less active you are, the less carbs you need. Protein suppresses ghrelin more effectively, so you don't overeat. And it also ensures that the glucose from carbohydrates is more slowly absorbed, so you don't get the high increase and the quick crash. Get a good night's sleep as much as possible, 8 to 10 hours if possible, and make sure that you don't eat a big meal before. There's a 3-2-1 rule. You eat 3 hours before you go to bed, you turn off your devices 2 hours before you go to bed, and you leave an hour to wind down. So it's really important to have a really good routine that gets your body and your mind knowing that you are getting ready to go to sleep. and 8 to 10 hours is preferable. Eat more in the second half of your menstrual cycle. Appetite and cravings naturally go up then. Don't fight this. This is not the time to be trying to do calorie restriction. That's better in the first half of your cycle. Just make sure that what you eat is nutrient dense and not sugar or salt dense, because again, that will also affect your weight and your appetite. Make sure you're drinking enough water. You know, have 2 glasses on waking, and then at least two water bottles throughout the day. More if you're active, because dehydration can affect appetite too. It might be if you're craving or you're hungry that you're actually dehydrated, and if you are dehydrated, that in itself can also suppress our appetite. So drinking enough water is really important. Mindful eating is really important. It can improve appetite, and it can also stop overeating too if you have a big appetite. Really important that you spend time before you eat sitting down. Don't eat rushing around, don't eat in the car, don't eat at your desk. Spend some time smelling the food until you salivate. That can be really helpful if you have a very low appetite. You want to be smelling food so that you start getting the saliva going. Take time looking at the food. Make food visually appealing on your plate. Look at it and so that you your mouth waters and you want to eat it. Use things like spices and herbs as well. They improve the flavor and they're good for us. So they're actually better than lots and lots of salt. We don't want to not have salt, but we don't want to have too much salt either. And then eat consistently every time, same time every day. Our body really likes routine. We have all of our organs have clocks. Our gut has a clock. It likes it when we eat at the same time. Get moving. Exercise improves our appetite. It also helps if stress or poor sleep is the reason behind our appetite problems as well, because we know that when we exercise, it reduces the cortisol, the adrenaline, it produces the endorphins, the good feeling chemicals, and so that will then help with our appetite. It can create an appetite because our body then needs more nutrients. We know that people that exercise generally will have better sleep as well. So moving your body in whatever way you can, in whatever way you enjoy, is really important. And then if you really struggle with your appetite, just have smaller meals more frequently, or try things like soups and broths and stews, because it's really important that you are getting nutrients in your body, because then it can become a vicious cycle where if you don't eat, it actually becomes more difficult to then stimulate your appetite and then eat food too. Well, I'm talking about just kind of general low appetite or increased appetite. There's obviously a spectrum where we move into eating disorders, where you might have an appetite and you eat food and then binge, or it might be you don't have an appetite and you just don't eat. So when you have no appetite or very low appetite, we call it anorexia. That's the technical term, which is very different from the condition anorexia nervosa, where you actually just starve yourself. They're very different things. And so I'm just talking here about just having a low appetite and maybe not eating as much as you could, or having a low appetite in the morning and addressing those. That's very, very different. And if we're talking eating disorders, then there are professionals that will specifically support you with that. I'm just talking about just general things that you can do to improve your appetite, either to slightly decrease it or slightly increase it. So let me know if you've got any questions, or if you've got any feedback, or if you've got comments about your own experience. I'd love to hear from you. And I hope that you've got some really interesting nuggets from this and some tips that you can take forward into your day. So have a fantastic day, and I will see you all soon.